again for the introduction, the opportunity. Yeah, that conference in Columbus was really great. I really enjoyed it. As I may have mentioned, I'm an Ohio State Buckeye myself. Of all places, I ended up here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is kind of crazy. But it was wonderful to be back there, and that was the first conference I've been to of yours, and I really enjoyed the content, the networking, and the opportunities. So I know we have many SmartWay partners in this group, but many that are not SmartWay. I also know that there is a range of understanding about the program. So, bear with me as if you already know, quite a bit about the program. I'm going to cover some of the basics. And the goal here is to, multifold. It's really to help make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page about what the program has to offer, help you to understand, the benefits of participating and also, how carriers work within the program, because they're obviously kind of the foundation of the program. And I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail about what the carriers do, how they participate, and how the data is used in the program. I'll also talk a little bit about some of the carbon accounting that's done. I do have my colleague Glenn online. He's a partner account manager, and he may help answer some questions at the end. But if there's anything we can't answer, we'll be sure to get back to you on. Let me see if there we go. So what I usually like to do in discussions like this is to kind of do a broad framing initially of just kind of underscoring why the freight sector is a big concern for policymakers, and use that for an entree to why we developed SmartWay, and again talk about how carriers work within the program, and then we'll save some time at the end if there's any questions or hopefully some good discussion. So I want to make sure that everybody understands EPA knows that freight is a cornerstone of our nation's economy. We know that we all depend on the delivery of goods and materials for our jobs and our businesses and our livelihoods. I'm acutely attuned to the automotive industry, living in Michigan for the last 30 years, and care deeply about the sustainability of the automotive industry and all of the suppliers that participate. But it's pretty staggering when you look at the sheer volume of freight that's moved within our country, not to mention import and export. Significant portion of our economic development, about 8% of our U.S. GDP is attributed to freight logistics. So, but that also does come with an environmental cost or an environmental impact. For really the first time in our nation's history, and in the last handful of years, transportation has now become the single largest source of freight emissions. This is due in part to many things, including the fact that, bear with me for a second, the fact that we continue to decarbonize our power grid and a lot of our industrial processes. We are making progress on the transport side, but as we decarbonize other sectors and as transport continues to grow rapidly, we are seeing transport now as the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And then if you take a closer look at the transport sector, I had to advance here, give me 1 second. There we go. When you take a closer look at the transport sector, passenger cars are, of course, still the primary source of emissions in this sector. But freight is not only at least 30% of our total transport greenhouse gas emissions, but freight emissions are growing more rapidly than passenger transport. And there's a lot of reasons for this, and I'm sure reasons people understand, especially with the growth of e-commerce and other freight activity. So EPA has been focused on this for quite some time. We also know that fuel is a significant portion of freight operations expense. It's second after wages, but that presents opportunities for organizations, not just the carriers, but the shippers that are dependent upon those carriers to deliver their goods. Companies are under increasing pressure to be good corporate citizens and reduce their freight transport emissions. So another reason why EPA is trying to help companies with this. This is why we developed the SmartWay Transport program about 20 years ago. We sat down with freight industry leaders and key trade associations like American Trucking to develop a voluntary market-based partnership whose primary goal is to essentially help companies to benchmark their emissions, to do that in such a way that they can also report and reduce those emissions, and in many cases reduce costs. This strengthens our nation's freight sector, improves our nation's energy security, and especially helps industries like the automotive sector. The program was adopted by Canada in 2012. We've been working with Mexico to pilot it there. And today, the program has over 4,000 partners in pretty much every major economic sector: food, beverage, retail, manufacturing, consumer goods, pharmaceuticals, just about anything. The sectors which essentially move the most ton miles of freight, as you can imagine. And it also represents every type of business, from small businesses and owner operators and mom and pops, all the way up to dozens and dozens of Fortune 500 firms. Okay. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but we are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. And what I wanted to share with you is that the program has evolved considerably since it was launched in 2004. We've gone through multiple iterations of the methodology that we use for benchmarking partners, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more later here. We've introduced new categories of partners. We've been working with international stakeholders to broaden the reach of programs like SmartWay in other countries and regions, as not just Canada and Mexico, but countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and Europe have developed green freight programs modeled on SmartWay, in many cases developing data like what SmartWay does. SmartWay has been recognized by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol as providing a methodology which matches the GHG protocol standards. And that's important for people who are interested in greenhouse gas accounting, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. We worked with the ISO, International Standards Organization, to develop a new ISO standard for freight carbon accounting, which is based in part on SmartWay. And there are a host of other things that the program has done over time to essentially evolve to try and meet the needs of our partner base. So let me just kind of take a little bit of a dive into essentially how the program operates. And I'll spend a little bit of time on this here because this is really the foundation of the program. The best way to think about it is to really focus on the three partner groups that we have: carriers, 3PLs, and shippers. And each partner category plays an essential role in the way that data is collected and shared in the program. The first thing you should know is that EPA essentially serves as a neutral third party or an honest broker of key freight activity data, which is used for emissions benchmarking. And that starts first with the carriers. And when I say carriers, that's not just truck carriers, but we have other modes of freight such as rail, air, marine, and barge. And I'll talk for this presentation, I'll talk mostly about trucking because that's pretty much the primary sector that I know most of you are focused on. Essentially, what carriers do is on an annual basis, they give us very detailed data about their operations. And I'll go into that a little bit more detail. And we use that data to rate and rank their environmental performance, their energy efficiency, and their emissions. And we publish those emissions ratings and those factors not only on our website, which is publicly available, but through the benchmarking process that the shippers and the 3PLs use. So that data essentially gets pulled into an analysis that shippers and 3PLs do. They each do annual reporting as well, but essentially what they're reporting is the total amount of freight that they ship on an annual basis with SmartWay carriers on either a mile or ton mile basis. or in some cases, there are some custom metrics that can be used. But typically, what we invite our partners in those categories to do is to essentially do an inventory of the total amount of freight shipped with SmartWay carriers. Now, shippers who hire logistics and/or carriers can get the benefit of having those analyses included in their operations. So, because there's so many complex business arrangements, we set up the program so that it was flexible in such a way that that the carrier data gets rolled up into the logistics data, and then the logistics data is then made available for shippers. But shippers who only hire carriers directly can get the benefit of that as well. So hopefully that makes sense, and you're still with me on that point. Give me 1 second here. All right. So this is a snapshot of essentially what that data looks like. Here's an example of what type of data we collect from the truck carriers. They tell us how many total miles they're driving on an annual basis, not only the total fuel used, but obviously all the variations of fuel types, such as CNG and LNG and every variation of biodiesel. They can also get credit for using EVs and those zero tailpipe emissions. They tell us, the model year and truck class, full inventory of all their equipment, whether it's long haul or short haul, urban or overland. They give us information about payload weights and operational types and a few other things that essentially we're able to use to calculate their emissions across multiple pollutants. And we'll get into that a little bit more detail here. As I mentioned earlier, also then the shippers and the logistics partners do an accounting of how much freight they're shipping with them. They can segment their data in different ways. They can break it down by mode or operation or subsidiaries. And again, lots of flexibility in the way that partners can do this. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about essentially what that data process looks like. And this is helpful for those of you that are trying to figure out how to work with your carriers to report into the SmartWay program. The first thing that you should know is that in order to allow for apples to apples comparison, we have 13 different carrier categories. So truckload, less than truckload, reefer, tanker, automotive carriers, heavy haul, flatbed, et cetera. They're all compared to each other across multiple metrics. We essentially score them based on their CO2, NOx, and PM performance on both a grams per mile and gram per ton mile. And we do that because, as you would imagine, different types of freight operations might want to focus more on grams per mile or grams per ton mile. We know that CO2 is, of course, what most partners are really focused on because you're working to decarbonize and reduce your supply chain greenhouse gas emissions. But we also like to remind partners that SmartWay gives you really good information about NOx and PM because those are localized air quality pollutants, which have significant public health impacts, especially in urban areas, especially in disadvantaged areas. Companies who are working to address the environmental justice components of their supply chain should definitely take a closer look at the NOx and PM performance of your carriers. And essentially what we do is, in order to preserve the confidentiality of our partners' data, we do not publish the carrier's exact emissions. What we do is we put them into these quintile ratings, or what we call bins sometimes, with 1 being the best or the lowest emissions, 5 being the poorest. And we rank them across each of those pollutants and each of those metrics. So each carrier in the program will get 6 different essential carrier scores. And here's what that looks like on the ground. Here's an example of the rankings for less than truckload CO2 gram per mile. And this is kind of reverse order now. We're essentially showing what the published emissions values are for the top 20% all the way down to the bottom 20%. And you can see each of the data points there. This essentially represents what is the midpoint of the value range for the carriers that kind of fall into that analysis. And these values are updated every year based on those carrier submissions. So even though I said this is just an example of LTL CO2 gram per mile, what that looks like when it gets published is a report like this. You can find this on our website today, but again, this is the exact same data which gets pulled into the analysis that shippers do. So those same, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and emissions values that you see there, you'll see on these ratings. Again, this is LTL dry van carriers. You'll see those bin ratings 1 through 5 here, with the emissions factors gram per mile and gram per ton mile for each of those pollutants. So it's a lot. It's pretty dense, but it's broken down by every carrier and every category. You can see at the bottom of the screen here, all of the different 13 categories are listed. Carriers are searchable by SCAC or motor carrier, DOT number, lots of ways that the companies can track the performance there. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, kind of how carriers are scored and ranked, and how that data gets pulled into the work that the shippers are doing. But that's really just a starting point. If you think about it, reporting doesn't do anybody any good unless you do something with that data. The whole point is to help carriers to essentially baseline and benchmark and report their performance, to have the shipper customers who are hiring them be able to calculate your own greenhouse gas emissions, but then also to work, of course, to decarbonize over time and to implement strategies and technologies and practices in those freight operations, which will reduce emissions. And that's where the other facets of the SmartWay program come into play. I'm just going to highlight some of them here for you, but essentially what we do is we work to promote a range of these approaches so that carriers can learn things that they can do to improve performance. One key takeaway for you is you should know that the SmartWay program is not prescriptive. That is, we don't require carriers to be at a certain performance level. We don't require them to implement certain technologies. We kind of like to think of it as it's a menu that's provided for companies to pick and choose what works for them, and then they can drive their own supply chain performance over time. And so I'll kind of go through a few of these. The technology verification program is a separate group here at SmartWay, a team of scientists and engineers who actually collect data from technology providers across different categories of equipment, like idle reduction, advanced aerodynamics, tire technologies, and others. And we essentially, through standard test protocols, establish ways to measure the performance of this equipment. And then we actually publish lists online of various configurations of technologies and the estimated range of emissions savings that they can achieve. This technology verification program is also the basis for a tractor and trailer labeling program. So we now work with pretty much all the major OEMs on the tractor and trailer side who are actually speccing, building, and marketing and selling configurations of SmartWay verified equipment. And that's why sometimes on the roadways, if you look closely, you'll never see a logo that big, but you will see on many places, you'll see a SmartWay sticker on a tractor or a trailer or other equipment. And what that means is that equipment meets those specs. Do you have a question? Oh, okay. Yeah, if anybody has a question, I can't see screens or hands or anything, but we'll get to questions at the end. So again, this is not prescriptive. Companies get to figure out what works for them, and they know better than anyone, what really will help. It doesn't make sense, obviously, to put advanced aerodynamics on, low speed urban delivery vehicles. But that's where idling technology, idle reduction technologies or tire technologies are going to make a bigger difference. Here's an example of what that looks like in some of the reports that we publish. We publish what we call technology bulletins, where companies can essentially get a closer look at what each of these different types of verified technologies look like, estimates of fuel savings and emissions reductions potential as well. Again, these are all published on the website, as well as we do a series of webinars which teach partners about these technologies and practices. Um, SmartWay doesn't necessarily always have, the latest and greatest information. We work to kind of over time collect from our partners what works, what doesn't work, and evolve our content over time to reflect the state of the art. We also provide free online e-learning curriculum for drivers to improve driver efficiency. We work closely with our partners in Canada to develop this curriculum, which is now also available in Spanish. It's being used not just in North America, but in Latin America as well. This is an excellent course, which essentially teaches fuel-saving driving techniques, and it's been shown to achieve up to 20% fuel economy improvement. And they've demonstrated through studies that drivers which take training like this are also safer, and that improves safety performance as well. Just one more benefit of the program. We do case studies with partners. We learn from them about various projects and technologies that they've implemented, and we publish those for, again, learning and sharing. We did a really interesting research study with the Home Depot a handful of years ago, taking a look at their global supply chain and sourcing from China, and basically quantifying the environmental benefits of more advanced supply chain practices. This type of content is also available. Now, in addition to providing opportunities for companies to learn how to improve performance, we also like to recognize leaders and achievers of emissions reductions. We have multiple different recognition programs, such as our SmartWay Excellence Award program and a high performers list that we publish. We have a new program called Profiles in Leadership, which helps to showcase company success in these areas. We publish this on the website again, and try and create visibility for partners to kind of toot their horn a little bit and get some visibility for that. Our partners are also qualified to use the SmartWay logo in various ways to showcase their commitment to freight sustainability and educate their customers and their consumers and employees about what they're doing. I just wanted to convey that, again, we work to evolve the program over time by learning from you, working with your partner account managers to help companies learn how to get the most out of the program. Our partners are increasingly using SmartWay in their benchmarking, their CSR and ESG reporting, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second here. So yeah, let's pivot to what this greenhouse gas reporting landscape looks like, because we know and we hear from our partners that this landscape is shifting very rapidly in recent years. I know unless you're working in the sustainability area for your company, a lot of people may not realize that there are not only new reporting requirements coming online from the SEC and California, but Europe itself has a new CSR reporting directive. It's called this Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and that's a very broad new requirement in Europe, but it does require greenhouse gas reporting. We don't have time to get into each of these today, but we are hearing from our partners that they're essentially ramping up how to prepare for these mandates. And again, this is where it's helpful for you to know that because each one of these requirements essentially, for now, is saying that the companies are suggested to follow the greenhouse gas protocol, that seems to be kind of the prevailing approach for the methodologies that should be used for quantifying and reporting your greenhouse gases. And because SmartWay was accorded the greenhouse gas protocol mark, you can trust SmartWay to help you to do that work. I do want to kind of showcase for you that we also know from our partners that this is a very noisy space right now. I kind of call it the Wild West, because there are so many different types of green freight programs and tools and methods and platforms and systems out there. It's kind of hard for companies to navigate that space. So again, even though EPA does not require companies to do greenhouse gas reporting, and other entities are requiring it, we definitely want to be able to help you to navigate this space and collect and analyze the data from SmartWay so that you can use to meet these requirements. I want to go into a little bit more detail about what this looks like, because SmartWay is aligned with a lot of these. But before we do that, it's probably worth taking a quick look at what other sectors are dealing with here. Obviously we know in the automotive sector that a major portion of your scope 3 emissions are coming from the product use phase, which is pretty obvious. But there are many other similar sectors which are very dependent upon suppliers and providers, which are a significant portion of their scope 3 emissions. And SmartWay can help companies to assess their scope 1, 2, and scope 3 emissions. And that's what we'll talk a little bit about next. But before we do that, I also wanted to kind of reframe for you, going back to the complexity of this space, how companies can navigate this array of things to look at. There are a lot of different types of databases out there with greenhouse gas data. There are various tools and calculators and commercial platforms out there. There are a range of methodologies such as modeling or default estimates. Most credible methodologies are based on fuel use and weight and distance. And then there are green trade programs, again, across the board in many areas of the world. But the good thing, of course, for SmartWay is that SmartWay is essentially all of these things in the US and Canada, and you can tap into that to help you with your reporting. I also wanted to talk a little bit about GLEC, which I know we get questions from people in your sector and other partners. For those who are not familiar with it, GLEC is the Global Logistics Emissions Council, and this is administered by the Smart Freight Center, which is a nonprofit based in Europe. And this organization, Smart Freight Center, is kind of leading the charge at a global level on helping companies to kind of wrap their arms around this and to provide guidance and tools and methodologies that they can use to essentially develop their greenhouse gas emissions inventories. We get a question often about, well, how does SmartWay and GLEC work together? Or how is SmartWay aligned with GLEC? And the good news that I want to share with you is that these are perfectly aligned. And the best way that I can explain it is to think of GLEC as essentially a cookbook full of recipes that will teach companies how to calculate your greenhouse gas emissions. It's a framework cookbook, essentially. SmartWay is a key ingredient in those recipes in that cookbook. So, SmartWay can, help you to assess your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions across CO2, NOx, and PM. And SmartWay currently only covers tank to wheel emissions, but GLEC does provide a well to tank conversion factor. We are looking at evolving SmartWay to also include that fuel life cycle full well to wheel emission factor. But here's kind of what that essentially looks like. GLEC recognizes SmartWay as a recommended methodology for the modes of air, rail, road freight, and inland waterway, along with a couple of other methodologies in a couple of cases here. SmartWay does not cover logistics sites, of course. And then when it comes to marine shipping, the prevailing program or the state-of-the-art program is called Clean Cargo, which is now administered by Smart Freight Center. And rather than duplicate that, we're actually aiming to bring clean cargo emissions data into the SmartWay program. But again, the takeaway here is that SmartWay and GLEC are essentially aligned using these methodologies. And then on the right here, this is just an example of what a public disclosure report looks like from SmartWay. We, again, were recognized by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol as meeting their methodology. So we were accorded the built-on GHG protocol mark for our calculator tools, and that's why you see that in the public disclosure report. So just to kind of move toward wrapping up here, in terms of some of the key takeaways, again, SmartWay will help you to get your total mass emissions for across those multiple pollutants in U.S. and Canada. We're hoping to include Mexico in the near future. You can look at your total mass emissions, but also intensity factors, emissions intensity factors by mode and by metric. I talked a little bit about the well to tank emission factors that we're looking at considering. It's very flexible in the way that you can break down your reporting and assessments by business unit or subsidiaries. The program does require an annual reporting cycle, which is based on the prior calendar year's freight activity, and then give you those scope 1, 2, and 3 reports. The only data that we publish online are the carrier performance rankings. We never publicly disclose any shipper or logistics we publish logistics emission ratings, excuse me. We just don't publish shipper data in any form. The only thing the only indicator online is shippers are listed as partners on the website. And again, EPA is serving as that neutral broker between these partner categories. We are seeing more and more of our partners using this data in their CDP and other types of public disclosure reporting and target and goal setting. And again, our goal is to continue to ensure that we're aligned with those prevailing global methodologies and standards. This is just a kind of a quick snapshot of what the results we're seeing over the last 20 years. Based on the data that we've collected from our partners, we've shown that they've saved over $52 billion in fuel from implementing advanced strategies and technologies, significant reductions of CO2, NOx, and PM emissions. And again, this is a real boost to our economy. Those are just some examples of some of the partner types there at the bottom. So to wrap up, I just want to kind of briefly walk you through, if you're interested in kind of nudging your carriers to join SmartWay, just to give you a sense of what it takes for them to participate in the program. Again, the program is voluntary from our perspective, but we do know that many shippers actually either prefer or increasingly require their carriers to join the program. And we think that's a good thing, but our goal is to just kind of give you the content and let you figure out what you want to do with it. We're seeing more and more shippers put SmartWay in RFPs and RFQs, and there are even some examples of shippers that are essentially providing financial incentives for carriers by not only requiring them to join, but also adjusting the surcharge rates that they pay them based on their SmartWay performance, and that's pretty exciting. So if you want your carriers to join, essentially what they need to do is go to the website, and this is the homepage of the website. They're going to go to this section here and click on how to become a carrier partner in the program, and that will take them to a page that looks like this, how to become a SmartWay partner. If they scroll to the bottom of the page, they're going to see, after seeing some of the other important information, a link down at the bottom that will say how to apply or get started by applying through this link. But this is a multi-stage process. When they go to apply, they're essentially going to be filling out just a very basic application form, which is going to ask them for a little bit of company information. It's going to ensure that they're applying in the right partner category because we have so many different types of carrier categories. There's a partnership agreement, which just has some basic terms about what's expected to participate, what EPA commits to do, and a few other legalese elements here. Once they click on that, they're going to give us some basic contact information. This is where we ask them to begin to tell us who the key contacts are, as well as their SCAC and MCN numbers and things like that. And then once they complete that gets submitted to EPA. It will be received on our end by the team of partner account managers, and a partner account manager will respond with a user ID or a SmartWay ID that they can then use to log into the SmartWay partner portal. The data process now is all automated online. It's kind of like a TurboTax thing where a carrier will log in, and once they log in, they will be given an opportunity to submit their data to EPA through either one of a couple of different options. And I'm just going to give you a quick example here. If they're a small carrier, which is a fleet of fewer than 20 trucks, and they only drive diesel or gasoline, and it's all Class 8s, then they can fill out the online short form tool. This is a little bit more simplified reporting. It takes fleets like this a very short amount of time to complete this. And again, in this case, they're really just asking them for, if it's fewer than 20 trucks, break it down by model year, and we know they're Class 8 because that's the only way they can do that. And then how much fuel they're burning, and a couple other data points, and they're done. That's pretty straightforward. Any carrier with more than 20 trucks or anything a little more complex, and this is what most of our partners do, will fill out the full online truck tool. This tool is going to prompt them for more detail than what I just described. It's going to take a little bit more time, but this is where it really kind of comes down to how good they are at tracking the data that's needed to do this submittal. We do often hear people ask, how long is it going to take for a carrier to do this? And it really depends a lot on how good their records are. But again, if you think back on that screen where I showed all the data points that they have to submit, if they have that data at their fingertips, most carriers can do this work in a few hours. If they hit any snags, they can call their partner account manager or the helpline, and they can do a little bit of hand-holding and walk them through things. But most carriers can do this in a few hours or a day, with starts and stops. Carriers which are not good at record keeping and have to scramble to go find all the different data points are going to take multiple days or a week or so to do that. So again, it's going to really depend a lot on how good their records are. But if you think about it, that's also an indication of how efficient they are at other things. So it's kind of like, I guess, a lot of things in business. So yeah, that essentially kind of encapsulates what the process is for carriers to participate. Once a carrier submits that data to EPA, the partner account manager will review that data. There's a very rigorous QA/QC process to ensure that the data that's submitted is legitimate and accurate. We don't really have a lot of time to get into that process, but there are actual data quality flags in the tool which will recognize data points which are either out of range or don't make sense, based on our records of what the sector typically looks like. And depending on how far out of range a data point is, a carrier might just have to provide an explanation for it, or kind of work with the partner account manager to adjust what they're reporting. But again, at the end of the day, this is a voluntary program. When companies submit their data, they're signing that partnership agreement saying Scout's honor, this is accurate, and we have a high degree of confidence based on the rigor that this is a high quality data. There have been instances in the past where partners have been excused from the program for non-compliance or not being fully trustworthy in their submittals, but those are kind of few and far between. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of what the process is for carriers to participate and the benefit of participating. Hopefully you have a sense of the benefit of you as a shipper or supplier participating in the program are. And I'll share these slides with Kellen and the team after, but I'll encourage you to, when you get a chance, take a look at some of our promotional videos. So there's some links here at the end. These are just kind of fun, quick little more marketing videos, but they kind of summarize the partner process in some cases. So take a look at that when you get a chance. So I'll stop there. It looks like we might have some time left for some questions. And Kellen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Buddy, for the presentation. So I'm going to pause the recording here.